The Black Ship. Chapter 47, Part 1. Come on, Leopold! You were there! You had to see something else! Leopold Dakar wanted to groan as his roommates continued to press him on the subject that was, unsurprisingly, the only thing everyone was talking about. On the one hand, he wanted to yell at them to stop pestering him with the same questions over and over again. On the other, he couldn't blame them. Hell, he could hardly believe it himself despite seeing Wyatt dispatching the first 4 Marines. He had followed his orders diligently and prevented any other shuttle from leaving the Gallant Venture's hangar. Due to his proximity to the Gallant Venture, he had a clear view of the hangar. After Wyatt vanished into the depths of the ship, all he could do was wait. Then, the first wounded traitors started to arrive. The more joined them, and some more after that. Some arrived in small groups, while others came in larger groups. When the number of traitors reached over 100, he asked himself what the hell was happening. Knowing they weren't going anywhere, the traitors on board the shuttles disembarked, and from what he could see, tried to mount a defensive position or a party to go after Wyatt. They were stopped by a large group soon arriving, followed by a steady influx of more traitors. Whatever information they shared with each other was enough to dissuade any attempt of resistance from them. They threw their weapons away, removing ammunition and tossing it all in several piles. Time passed slowly and wickedly fast at the same time, but he didn't move. Not even when the Royal Marines arrived in a shuttle. Their landing was smooth, and the traitors immediately surrendered. That was all he knew, even as waves of surrendered traitors joined their comrades at the hangar in defeat. Just what had Wyatt done? And more importantly, how? He was just a single man. It had led him to question himself about him. Was he really an agent of House Astor or some secret super soldier in disguise? Believing that would have been easier, but the truth about his mannerisms, the way he moved, and his willing submissiveness couldn't be faked. But that didn't answer the question of how in the prince's name was he capturing a single ship, a destroyer class no less, all by himself. Then, when the scramblers died, he was immediately ordered to return, leaving Wyatt behind. It left a bad taste in his mouth, but orders were orders, and he figured that 3 Royal Marines would be able to keep his squadron leader alive if, indeed, he still was. The impromptu ceremony that followed was, well, he didn't see the point in it, no matter how much Raquel, Noltar, and Gregor insisted that it was a great honor. He didn't know about that. He was a commoner. What he could understand, though, was the logistics head officer stared at Wyatt with hungry, inviting eyes. That language was universal and one he was very fond of. But just looking at his squadron leader told him that the insinuations Sabraska Kaspars attempted had gone way over his head. He thought that whatever he'd done would be left as a mystery sealed deeply within his records. The video depicting his incursion was released at the start of the next day's shift. Leopold turned to face his roommates as he finished putting on his armor for combat practice with his squad mates. Look, I already told you and every other scavenger that's cornered me that I don't know anything else. I picked Wyatt up and delivered him to the Gallant Venture much like a regular hauler would do. Come on, Leopold! Don't be like that! Tell you what, I'll give you 50 credits if you fess up, one of them proposed. You have to know something more, Dakar. There's no way the Astor dog was a commoner. That's it, isn't it? You were ordered to keep your mouth shut, another proposed. No one has ordered me to keep anything of mine closed, Leopold answered, frowning. Look, I really don't know anything else. Hell, I know as much as you do. I don't meddle in the stuff blue bloods dip their noses in and don't plan to. Then does that mean he's really a noble? Another asked. No, you idiot. He was a commoner and then the prince himself made him a noble, remember? The first one said, crossing his arms. Although I'm not too sure he was a commoner at all. I mean, you just don't do the crap he did. Cynthia Winfield has been training him personally, and did you see his guns? I've never seen something like them before. They tore through Marine-grade shields like they were nothing. I'll bet my next payment on that he's a Royal Marine reject. Well, I, for one, believe that he's a commoner. Most of the other guys on my shift think so. I mean, come on, he barked once on command, remember? No blue blood would let that insult slide. One scoffed. You just want that to be true to feel better about yourself. I wouldn't think discard that option so easily. There have been commoners recognized by nobles and turned into nobles themselves. Leopold stepped out as his roommates continued their discussion among themselves. As he made his way to meet with his squad mates, he overheard several conversations on his way there. What they were talking about was obvious. Again, he couldn't blame them. Everything surrounding Wyatt Staples had been shrouded in mystery, speculation, and dozens of theories ever since the prince elevated him to the rank of lieutenant. His recent exploits only served to ignite the situation further. He noticed that most of those conversations talked about him eagerly. The commoners spoke far more enthusiastically than the nobles. Part of him wanted to laugh at their hypocrisy. How many of them had been envious of him? How many had insulted and cursed his name from the safety of their lowly positions? Commoners were meant to know their place. They all had been taught that, thoroughly. To see another climb above them with such ease was, to most, infuriating. Despite the sudden shift of perspective and his personal disdain for it, there was something else in there, palpable yet hidden. There was fear. Not the familiar fear reserved for nobility. Well, there was that, but that was just a given. The other fear he could see reflected in the way his fellow commoners spoke, how their body language shifted uncomfortably, and the hushed tones asking for more information, asking where Wyatt stood. Would he simply ignore them, or would he punish any failure and perceived slight? Leopold shook his head in an attempt to rid himself of such thoughts. When he arrived at the mess hall, he got his breakfast and searched for his fellow squad mates. Spotting them, he joined them on the table that had, more or less, become theirs over the last weeks. "You appear disturbed, Leopold," Gregor pointed out as soon as Leopold sat next to him. "That's because I have roommates constantly pestering me about Wyatt. They won't be talking about anything else for days," Leopold answered tiredly. "Please tell me you're having an awful time dealing with other nobles too?" "Very," Noltar replied. "There are a lot of rumors going around their private circles. I can't say for sure, but it seems that most nobles have chosen to back down and remain on Wyatt's good side." He chuckled heavily. "We've seen what his bad side looks like. To do something like that to a noble from a prominent house and a potential future heir? In their place, I wouldn't try to antagonize him either," Raquel said, crossing her arms, her half-eaten meal ignored. "He can be a tremendously dangerous man, inside and outside the cockpit. If anything, he's clearly established himself as someone who mustn't be trifled with carelessly." "I agree that he's dangerous. That is good. Now he's safeguarded against petty brown-nosers and sly liars. However, it is my opinion that you focus too much on the spectacles of barbarity and not enough on his displays of honor and nobility. He spared more than he killed, used his own resources to save another's life, and honored his duel with the gallant Venture's captain. All marks of a man that values his convictions and morals," said Gregor before taking a sip of water. "Tell me, Leopold, do you know any commoners looking to ingratiate themselves with Wyatt and follow him as his faithful sycophants?" Leopold dipped a fork in his food before replying. "I don't know if I should be glad or worried that I can understand most of your fancy words, Gregor." He smirked once his friend raised an unamused eyebrow. "And do you think I know every commoner on the ship or something? I mean, some might try to, but I don't think Wyatt is the sort of guy to have professional ass-kissers and bootlickers under him." "You're right about that, Leo. But our fearless, demented leader will need servants or followers at some point. We aren't high enough in the food chain to attract them or warrant them. But him? If you believe he isn't getting promoted after everything he's done, then you're either delusional or a fool." Noltar chuckled to himself, though it lacked his usual mirth. "That's a dangerous proposition, Noltar. Wyatt was promoted and then elevated to nobility in a short span of time. Rising through the ranks quickly isn't uncommon for members of powerful, wealthy, or influential houses. Wyatt may serve House Astor, but his wealth and standing is beneath notice. Only his perceived potential growth remains. "An enviable position, but a dangerous one," Gregor countered. "If he earned it, then what's wrong about it? I'd like to see other wings or talons pull the tricks he pulled to save our asses from the Drazen," Leopold argued. "Besides, he doesn't have a stick up his ass. He can shoot you dead, but he's a good guy. Have you seen him try to abuse his position or lord himself over anyone yet? No? Thought so. But you can't deny that he's deadlier than we believed. We already knew he was unconventional with his tactics, and his skill as a fighter pilot can't be argued against. Not after we lived through here." Raquel paused, frowning. I thought of him so differently," she admitted. "I must speak with him alone when the next opportunity presents itself." "If you're trying to get in his pants, don't bother. That head officer, Sabraska? I think she beat you to it. I don't think you can compete against a lady of her standing." "No offense," Noltar said, ending with a chuckle. "I have no such intentions." "I'm not a harlot," Raquel countered with a glare. Noltar shrugged in defense. "But what I need to say to him is between him and I." "Good luck with that," Leopold said before quickly chewing on some gray pasta and a small carrot slice. Raquel looked at him unamused. "No, really. Wyatt seems to appreciate others being straightforward with him. So, as long as you tell him whatever you want to tell him without trying to put a loop in it, then I think he'll hear you out." He took another mouthful. At least we know you're not going to try to butter him up. Raquel's expression softened and even gained him a short-lived but sincere smile. Ugh, don't get me started on that, Nultar groaned. Remember I said most nobles just want to stay on his good side? Commoner followers are one thing, but nobles? I've heard a few are planning to get closer to Wyatt. I suspect our crazy Aster dog is about to get many gifts, invitations for social discussions, and handwritten letters of appreciation and declarations of friendship in his near future. That much would be expected, a raspy voice announced suddenly, catching the 4 composters by surprise, especially given the size of the man who all but snuck up to them. His name will soon spread across the principality, whispered by commoners and nobles alike, though I'm certain a certain princess will keep him away from battles where piloting skills and bullets are useless. The man took a step forth. Mind if I join you? I've been looking for a chance to meet and speak to you in person. Not at all, Lord Maximilian, Nultar said, shifting uncomfortably on his seat as the lone wolf sat next to him, his frame swarfing him. Already he could hear murmurs and feel the gazes of everyone else present directed at their table. Even the chefs were peeking out, their curiosity stirred. It is good to see the faces of the remaining composters, Maximilian began, his smirk hidden behind his rebreather. I won't take much of your time. I wish to congratulate you all on your victory. Namely speaking, over me. We couldn't have possibly beaten you on an equal fight, Lord Maximilian, Gregor was quick to point out. Don't be so nervous. I hold no ill will toward any of you. Commander Redford Kalin was kind enough to show me how you were able to defeat me. Maximilian paused. Your coordination in battle was far superior and surprising. Rare are the times that I've seen fighter pilots work together as cohesive units and not just a collection of squadrons seeking to outdo each other. My congratulations to all 4 of you. I don't deserve your praise, Lord, Leopold said, stiff as a board. I didn't participate in the final assault. Nonsense, Maximilian replied. All of you played your parts, direct or not, all contributed to your victory over Felicity's forces, and my defeat. Be proud of your achievement, composters. All 4 pilots felt a surge of pride course throughout their bodies. It wasn't every day that a lone wolf personally praised someone. Now then, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you call your leader Aster Dog? Maximilian asked inquisitively. Nultar felt a cold finger run up his spine as he turned to Maximilian. Ah, you heard that. Maximilian stared at him silently for several seconds until the pilot understood the unspoken command. You see, Lord Maximilian, that's what many commoners and not an insignificant number of nobles called him behind his back. Oh? And what incidents led to the birth of this insult? Maximilian pressed on in a calm tone, though the air in the room became harder to breathe as tension slowly arose. My lord, Leopold, on the verge of sweating nervously, answered next. Lieutenant Wyatt Staples was ordered to bark once in public before his ennoblement. He complied, of course. The tension in the air increased. Gregor cleared his throat, continuing. He's been labeled as the Aster Dog largely in part due of the favoritism Her Majesty Princess Clara bestows upon him. After our liege the prince elevated him, the mockery continued in hushed tones throughout commoner and noble circles alike. Aster Dog, Maximilian repeated slowly and deliberately. A second later the tension disappeared. If it is intended as an insult, then I fail to see the logic behind it. Such simplicity is almost disappointing. He is a knight banneret of House Aster, is he not? The composters nodded in response. As I understand it, he shows exceptional loyalty toward the prince and his patrons. Calling him a dog, an animal that has come to be a living representation of the word loyalty, isn't an insult, but a compliment. Maximilian stopped himself, humming deeply. No, that's not correct either, now does it? Forgive me for inquiring, Lord Maximilian, but what are you implying? Raquel asked carefully. Implying? Maximilian turned his gaze to her. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. Dogs may represent loyalty, but many are commodities or simple pets. Lapdogs eager to display affection and keep their owners company, but offer no real service otherwise. He paused as the mess hall's usual busy ambiance had been replaced with silence. Everyone's attention focused on the lone wolf as he talked. Nevertheless, as is the case with dogs, some breeds can be fierce, dangerous, and deadly regardless of their loyalty. A good master will train, nurture, and control their dog to be what they need it to be. They can be guardians and protectors or ruthless attackers that won't stop until ordered. But there are dangerous breeds meant to hunt and kill, Unseen by all, he smiled. Hounds, we call them. Wyatt Staples isn't a dog, but neither is he a wolf. He's demonstrated to be capable of great acts of ruthlessness and benevolence in equal measure. Aster dog? Ridiculous. He's a wolfhound. The Aster's wolfhound, he proclaimed as he stood up. Be careful of his bite. His jaws will not show mercy if you're his prey, Maximilian said, then walked away. But as he walked past the only woman of the squadron, he placed a hand on her right shoulder. Excellent shot. With those parting words, Maximilian left the mess hall. For several seconds after his departure, silence reigned until shuffling and murmuring and loud conversations created a chaotic cacophony. Did that really just happen? Leopold asked, his breathing ragged as a nervous smile adorned his expression. A lone wolf complimented us? Complimented me? It seems so, Noltar agreed. I never thought a lone wolf would be so gracious in defeat. I'm not going to be able to focus on our training today, Raquel exclaimed, her hands trembling slightly. Speaking of our training session, where is our leader? Leopold asked, his breakfast forgotten. The princess left for the planet not too long ago. Who do you think is her shuttle pilot? Noltar replied. Negotiations will be bloody, won't they? Leopold asked with a half-smirk. He intended it to be a joke, but now he wasn't sure about it. Reval. The fires were visible from space as Wyatt followed the trajectory for the landing zone given by Grand General Percival Bucktail. He glanced at Clara, dressed in her armor, while Cynthia remained stoic as always. Fire is both beautiful and terrifying, Clara began. It reminds us that destruction isn't evil and that sometimes a mighty tree must burn for new life to grow and something greater to prosper. He stared at her for long moments, examining her expression. She wasn't smiling and lacked that glacial seriousness he was now growing accustomed to. Her eyes reflected a sense of longing, but they also had pity and resolve. Try as he might, he was unable to decipher why her stare felt so heavy and distant. Choosing to give up, he let out a soft hum. You know about forestry, Clara? He asked, pleasantly surprised. Hardly, the princess replied. Metaphors are philosophical in nature, Wyatt. I was referring to the planet, once called Bastanel by its first colonizers. Renamed Hago after the Hastrung system, was incorporated as part of House Ferentis's territory, now called Revel by its new rulers. Percival Bucktail may be sensible enough to avoid unneeded bloodshed. Expecting a self-imposed dictator to be reasonable is a futile delusion, Clara, Cynthia spoke, her voice firm and steady. Clara nodded. I know. But despite knowing this, I see no reason to not hope for the least bloody outcome, no matter how unlikely it may be. And if he isn't? Wyatt asked, frowning as the shuttle shook briefly. Must she answer? Cynthia replied in a stern but sensible tone. Right, stupid question, Wyatt thought before checking his fly route. We'll reach the designated coordinates soon, Clara. His choice is fascinating, isn't it? The ruins of a once luxurious villa with a breathtaking view of a vibrant lake with crystalline water, Clara said, frowning. Is our guest doing fine? Wyatt checked the passenger's camera and nodded once he saw Istanel Ferentis and his 4 marine escorts. When he saw him back at the Noir Navio, he smiled internally, knowing that Jincho's timed hack of his armor's olfactory filters had worked. It was petty of him, that much he could admit, but he wanted to give Istanel a taste, or rather smell, of what the Drazen truly were. But his smile vanished when he saw his eyes and face up close. Istanel still carried himself with arrogance, but his gaze was distant and vague, and his expression lacked the petulant smile that made his skin crawl. After countless hours of seeing it in a mirror, he knew that vacant stare too well. What had Istanel seen and experienced inside the cattle ship? He only intended to teach him a lesson, not whatever he'd seen in that hellhole. Shaking his head, he decided to focus on the task at hand. Turning to Clara, knowing full well she could read his mind somehow, he expected her to punish him. Instead, he found her focused, too. Her hands trembled nervously, as always, before she committed herself to a significant endeavor. He frowned, lips pursed. I'm sorry for causing you problems, he began. I couldn't control myself in the war room. I saw the fire and I lost myself in the moment. Think nothing of it, Wyatt. The head officers have been ordered to remain silent and never speak of the incident under threat of censorship, Clara replied as a soft, tiny smile appeared on her lips. I nearly shouted, too. You were so intense, but we can discuss that and much more at another time. In the privacy of my chambers? Gladly. Say, will there be sweets and baked goods? I've craved them, he asked with almost sheepishly. Cynthia and Clara merely smiled moments before the shuttle began decelerating, preparing for landing procedures. With the aid of the external cameras, Wyatt saw a group of 12 men waiting at the steps of what had once been a great mansion or villa. "Loyalty is its own reward," he muttered as the engine slowly shut down.